Welcome back to Tequila Professionals and Consultants. Today's subject is very interesting. We will talk about the difference between tequila and mezcal. This is a very interesting subject since a lot of people emails me asking what's the difference between tequila and mezcal. And I think this creates a lot of confusion, and not without fundament, since both has the same roots. In other words, they grew together until it came the time when each one took its own way. And to understand better this difference, I'm going to go back in history to 16th century when the spirit called vino mezcal, in other words, where in English it would be wine mezcal. But vino mezcal was the first distilled spirits produced in Mexico. And it was done when the Spanish brought to America the distillation technology, which was not very well known in the old continent. Well, in the year 1700, around that date, when wine mezcal started to grow and have more consumption, the Mexican government began to tax the production of this spirit. And this spirit began to grow, and more consumption was taking place. So in around 1750, a person called Pedro Sanchez Tagle was the first agave agriculture who began commercially to plant blue agave. Since then, more distilleries began to produce the wine mezcal or vino mezcal. During the 16th century, the spirit being produced at that time was called vino mezcal. In English would be wine mezcal. And it was produced mainly by Spanish. And as more and more popularity had this vino mezcal, the Mexican government began to tax the production of this spirit. It was in the late 1700s when a person named Pedro Sanchez Tagle began for first time to commercially plant blue agave in order to supply the small distilleries that were beginning to flourish at that time. In 1810, the Mexican Revolution came and the Indians became free. A lot of those Indians began to produce vino mezcal, but underground. They didn't want to be taxed. They didn't want to be detected by the government. They didn't want to pay taxes on the production of these spirits. So they set some small facilities called tabernas, and they were deep in the woods. And that was the place where they began to distill the vino mezcal. In 1875, tequila production began to change from being cooked in a cook pit or in a pit and change to a stone oven. And that was a huge step for tequila, because the very hard smoky flavor that used to have was eliminated thanks to the stone oven. The tequila was not anymore in contact with the fire and with the smoke that came out of the pit, and gave that flavor that maybe some of you have ever tasted, and it made during a time a very particular characteristic of mezcals. When the tequila could get rid of that deep smoky flavor is when what became more and more popular. And in 1888, the railroad for first time came to Guadalajara. Guadalajara is the capital of Jalisco state, where the tequila is produced. And at that time, and thanks to the railroad, tequila grew so much its popularity that they decided to change the name from Vino Mezcal to Mezcal Tequila. That was the first time that the people that produced the Mezcal Tequila needed a brand that distinguished the Vino Mezcal that was being produced in that region of Jalisco, and distinguished from other mezcals that were being produced in another regions. So they decided to call it Mezcal Tequila. With the railroad, modern alembics were brought from Europe, so the distillation process was improved 100%. And again, the characteristic flavor of the tequila improved again and grew its popularity back again, and producers decided then to call the tequila, the mezcal tequila, just tequila. They eliminated the word mezcal and call it tequila. As you see, tequila and mezcal had the same origin, but as the mezcal from one region, and I mean the Jalisco region, was able to improve faster than other mezcals produced in other states, it grew in popularity, and then the railroad helped to the distribution of these spirits. So they obviously began to distinguish the product produced in Jalisco and call it tequila, against other vinos mezcales produced in other states that kept the name mezcal. But meanwhile, what happened with mezcal? Well, mezcal also began to grow, but not as fast as tequila. Mezcal, one of the regions that favored more the mezcal was the region of Oaxaca in Mexico. Is where mezcal started to flourish more than in other states. And one of the reasons maybe is because in that region there are lots of agave varieties. So people have a lot of agave to produce the mezcal, and this agave grew wild. Nobody was cultivating it for commercially. There was so much varieties that people just kept producing mezcal. But they had something against it. There was not railroad at the same time than in Guadalajara. It took longer time for the railroad to reach Oaxaca. And also, there was the pit, the cooking pit, kept being the main tool to cook the agave. And that is one of the reasons why mezcal is back in time. In other words, the mezcal is produced in the same way tequila used to be produced more than 100 years ago. And that has, up to a certain point, has retarded the development of the mezcal market. Recently, some modern mezcal distilleries just quit to use the pit hole and began to use either autoclaves, just as the tequila, or stone ovens, which have been improving a lot the mezcal flavor. Some people tells me that they don't think, or they do not believe that taking away the smoky flavor is an advantage. They really like the smoky flavor. I would say I'm not against the smoky flavor, but there are levels. There are just some mezcals that is so difficult to stand because the smoky flavor is so concentrated that I just cannot swallow them. Instead, there are some that have kept the traditional production method, but in some way, somehow they regulate the smokiness of the flavor, and they are very, very, very good. During this session, we are going to try some tequilas and some mezcals. We will try to describe the flavor they produce, and I would like to invite you to try, and I always said the best tequila or the best mezcal is the one that you like the best. Okay, now let's talk about the worm. Some people, when we are in events, promotional events, ask me when we are promoting tequila, and they ask me, where is the worm? And I tell them, the worm is not for tequila, the worm is for mezcal. And there is not really a real reason why mezcal has grown with the believing that has to have a worm inside it. What happened is that when mezcal began to compete with tequila, with Soro, with Bacanora, and other regional spirits that were produced in regions, but all these spirits comes from agave. They also needed a marketing subject or a marketing brand. So mezcal producers began to put a worm in the bottle. And that was the mark that distinguished the mezcal from other kind of spirits. The funny thing is that nowadays, not all mezcals have a worm. And more than that, the worm that is used to put into the mezcal is not agave worm, it's a maguey worm. Maguey is a variety of Agavacea, but nothing has to do with mezcal nor with tequila. The maguey is bigger than any kind of agave, and it grows more in the center of Mexico rather than in South or Oaxaca. But anyway, this is the characteristic that the mezcal producers chose to give a certain touch of marketing to their spirit. Even so, the worm influenced in the flavor. The final flavor of a mezcal is very much influenced by the worm. The worm has a very funny taste that once put into the liquid or the alcohol, the worm begins to lose this flavor. And well, what can I say? Some people like it very much, some people doesn't. So again, it will be your choice if you decide to drink mezcal with worm or without worm. Also, another difference besides the worm, between mezcal and tequila, is the agave variety that they are made from. As everybody knows, tequila is produced from blue agave. Meanwhile, mezcal is produced from 40 or more different varieties of agave. And almost all of them are wild agave. Let's talk about another interesting subject, about the species of agave that makes the mezcal. There are a lot of agave varieties out in the fields. The one that is more used is called espadín. Espadín, I think, is the more widely agave used to make mezcal, and I tell you, it's very, very good. But my favorite is Tobala. Tobala is a small agave that gives a special, very, very nice flavor. There are other species that I can name you. One could be Mexicano, Cenizo, Lechuguilla, Pegalote, Potosino, Borrano, etc. There are more than, in Mexico is the country where more agave varieties are in the world. And I think as far as now, more than 160 different varieties of agave have been discovered. So we have a very, very wide supply of agave that we can use to make mezcal. As far as I know, there are not limits except for blue agave that mezcal can be made from. As a conclusion, we can say that the main differences between tequila and mezcal are, first, the variety of agave they are made from. Second, the region this agave is grown and either is tequila or either is agave. They are produced in different denomination origin regions. And third, and this is not very conclusive, but the third one, we can say that mezcal at this point is produced in a more artisanal way than tequila, because the tequila industry got more modern method of production, and mezcal had more artisanal ways of producing. And as a consequence, the mezcals are more smoky, or tends to be more smoky than tequila, though this is not a general rule. Brand new mezcal distillers are being built, and they are now very modern, and they are being able to extract that smoky flavor. But that's the conclusion I came to. Thank you for being with us this afternoon, and cheers.